The largest Latin American civil rights organization wants a federal investigation into the Texas Attorney General, claiming that his office has authorized searches at the homes of volunteers, searches that are illegal. That Attorney General, Ken Paxton, says what he's doing is investigating alleged election fraud and efforts to register non-citizens to vote, which is not legal.
It is evident through his patterns of lawsuits, raids, searches, and seizures that he is trying to keep Latinos from voting.
Members of the League of United Latin American Citizens had strong words for Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on Monday.
I just have a message for that Attorney General. You can come get me. You can do whatever the hell you think you want to do with me, but we're going to fight back.
It comes after Paxton announced an investigation last week into allegations of election fraud and vote harvesting.
When non-Texans blame Texans for our problems, saying things like, well, you voted for these people, so don't complain now, this is why I get so impatient. I've been saying it for years. It is incredibly difficult to vote our nearly entirely Republican state representation out of office. And the longer they stay in office, the more difficult it becomes. And the reason it becomes more difficult over time is because they make it more and more difficult for regular, everyday Texans to just get out and vote. Because if people can't vote, they can't vote you out.
It was just very embarrassing, intimidating, harassment. They searched everything in my house.
That was 87-year-old, one of the LULAC members. Joining us now is Texas State Senator Roland Gutierrez. No charges have so far been filed since the raids in 3 counties last week. The Attorney General's office says that they were all tied to allegations of voter fraud. First of all, do you think the raids are legitimate?
No, I don't, Sarah. I mean, the Attorney General is basing his claims on an affidavit that's from an election 2 years ago. There is no basis to what he's alleging. I want to be very clear who we're talking about. This is the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who was indicted for securities fraud.
Members of the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, in the San Antonio area are reporting that their homes have been raided by state officials, sometimes with weapons and SWAT gear, under direction from the state Attorney General, Republican Ken Paxton. Now, if you're not familiar with Ken Paxton, he is the worst. Just to give you an idea of what we're working with here, he is the highest law enforcement official in the state, and he himself is currently serving 100 hours of community service after he narrowly dodged securities fraud charges last month. He also barely evaded corruption charges this year after he was saved by high-ranking Republican state officials during his impeachment trial.
If you're named Ken Paxton, you're guilty.
Oh, and there was a literal dumpster fire outside of his office amidst all of this. He has been accused of misusing official information, retaliation, and abusing his power as Attorney General.
You're the victim of this lawfare in Texas where you had drunk Dade, the House Speaker, impeaching you for nonsense. So what are we going to do to fight back against this lawfare?
Yeah, and so Donald Trump, you said 700 and how many years? Mine is only 204. So I'm on the low end.
Weak.
So what I would say is the Democrats, they always support their own, whether they're guilty or not guilty. Republicans have in the past tended to distance themselves from any kind of controversy related to legal, and we just can't do that anymore. Not only do we have to embrace our people, but we also have to support them, both financially, we have to support them with our words. We can't run from it because they are destroying us.
A lot of what he's done has been in the service of himself or Donald Trump or the Republican Party of Texas, and that includes participating in statewide efforts to suppress voting amongst likely Democratic voters. This includes, but is not limited to, minority groups such as Latino and Black Texans, young, educated voters on college campuses, and voters in Democratic cities and counties. For Paxton's part, he has been accused of using consumer protection law numerous times to investigate mostly Latino-led organizations and civil rights groups in Texas. LULAC is just one of them. Lydia Martinez is an 87-year-old woman who has been volunteering with LULAC for over 3 decades. She is an American citizen. Her 5 brothers all served in the U.S. military. One of them was killed in Vietnam. The work she does with LULAC isn't partisan. She guides Latino senior citizens through the voting process. Her home was raided because she filed a complaint that some seniors were not receiving their mail-in ballots. After the raid, they took all of her means of communication, including her cell phone, and she was instructed not to talk to anyone about what had happened. And I'm sure it's completely unrelated, but LULAC recently endorsed Kamala Harris for president. But speaking of voter suppression efforts in Texas, they are real. From limiting early voting days because Democrats tend to vote early, to removing polling booths from college campuses because college students tend to vote Democrat, to giving the Secretary of State authority to intervene in local elections, specifically in large Democratic cities and counties with large minority populations, to tricking people into thinking they've been registered to vote when they haven't been. But I mentioned large minority populations in Texas. Minorities are actually the majority in Texas now. According to the most recent census, over 60% of Texans are non-white, but our state government officials are overwhelmingly white. Our attorney general, our governor, our lieutenant governor, and one of our 2 U.S. senators are older white men, and our other U.S. senator is Ted Cruz, technically non-white, but just technically, and no one is more upset about that than Ted Cruz himself. Meanwhile, speaking of our governor, Greg Abbott recently announced that Texas has removed over 1 million names from voter rolls. Voter roll maintenance isn't a problem. It's already mandated at both the state and federal levels. It's a routine thing that needs to be done. But when speaking about the purge, Abbott decided to take the opportunity to stoke fears of election fraud and non-citizen voters. He said, "Illegal voting in Texas will never be tolerated. We will continue to actively safeguard Texans' sacred right to vote while also aggressively protecting our elections from illegal voting." Who said anything about illegal voting? So who were the 1 million people purged from voter rolls? Were they non-citizens? Were they illegal voters? According to LULAC CEO Juan Proaño, no. Back in 2019, Texas officials identified 95,000 non-citizen voters on voter rolls and used the number to make claims of widespread voter fraud in Texas. However, those so-called non-citizens were later found to be naturalized citizens. The state found itself swamped with lawsuits, and the Secretary of State resigned over the incident. Voter suppression efforts are nothing new for Texans. Unfortunately, as the efforts get more deceptive and more aggressive, they become more and more difficult to combat. Now, Texas officials have resorted to voter intimidation tactics, targeting volunteers who are simply trying to help people vote. If that's not an indication that your vote matters, I don't know what is. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.